No, they were doing what Neil Armstrong said they did. They couldn't see any stars from the lunar surface except through the optics. So they had optics, or telescopes, binoculars.
But they wouldn't know what they're looking at.
Oh no, they've done a lot of work on the identification of galaxies in space. Same as they've done a lot of work on what rocks to bring back.
Technically, if you're in space, a number of stars that you're going to be looking at compared to what you see on Earth is going to be highly confusing.
Yeah, but they weren't there to look at them, were they? We know that. They weren't on the moon looking at anything.
Well,
they couldn't get there for a start. So this whole thing is another fabrication.
You won't find anything in the transcript of them setting this camera up.
That's a very good point.
Conversation has to be there, and it would have to be there every time they change it up.
Yeah, of course they would.
That, of course, isn't there because they're not there. They're on the rover. This is about the same problem you have with a guy orbiting the moon, and they don't talk to him for 3 days. Here they got a camera that needs manual control, and a guy that needs to be there 100% of the time to change those films up. You need another astronaut is what you need, because these other two guys, they're on the rover. That's Apollo 16. They're doing the Grand Prix. They're doing everything.
Yeah, they were.
And they're kilometers away. They can't just come back and reset this thing.
No, but you must understand, Scott, that you're not meant to say these things because you're destroying this wonderful narrative that NASA has fed to us, that they landed humans on the moon. Now, if they didn't land humans on the moon, which we know they didn't because they couldn't, all of this makes no sense at all, except if you're NASA and you have never a straight answer as your standard procedure.
Well, like I said, here they've added a piece of equipment just for show, just for the set, saying that they're going to do all of this stuff. But they actually need another person to operate it the entire time. You can't leave this thing alone. You have to come back and reset everything. But they're going to have a conversation. Whoever that person is has to have a conversation with Houston to line it up. They can't physically do that when they're just on the lunar surface. They can't figure it out. Okay, there's no way for them to triangulate their position. They would have to accurately calculate it, and while it's in a time lapse, these are mechanical machines. They're not like a telescope today that has auto tracking where you can do a time lapse. You set it up and you dial it in there, it'll be off within a few minutes. It won't even be on the right area of the sky. So how do you do a 30-minute time lapse?
When the spacecraft is exposed to 24 hours a day direct sunlight, it gets hot. And you can calculate the internal temperature of the spacecraft using the black body radiation, all the rest of it. Stephen Boltzmann constant. But how do NASA claim they kept the temperature down to about 20 degrees centigrade, 70 degrees Fahrenheit, so that the astronauts would be working in the shirt sleeve environment, which they claim to have got?
I can answer that because I was going over some of these documents, because they claim that what they do is they have a subliminator that's inside of the water reclamation system. And they also use glycol cooling loops as well. So there's the schematic showing how these guys did it. And there's your explanation.
But does that work?
It will, as long as you have enough water to feed to it.
Okay, so
venting it off.
The thing is that when you look on here, we're talking about vento. See the suit circuit assembly right here. See where it's got the water shut off? And then it's got the suit heat exchanger sitting in right here.
But you've got section number 2 there. And they're showing the venting and the steam duct where it's actually coming off in steam. That's releasing the heat. And on the other side, number 7 there, that's the cool side. Limited to the amount of water you can carry. The PLSS works the same way, right?
The water glycol mixture of the coolant loops was pre-cooled before launch using ground equipment to be used for cooling during launch through the atmosphere when neither the radiation panels nor the evaporators could be used. Where on the command module are these evaporators?
On the CSM?
I haven't seen them. I've seen them on the backpacks.
No, it was in the service module, and then the hoses went through that. You know that lock that holds the capsule on that they blow?
The equipment's in the service module itself.
Right, so it's circulating from the command module into the service module, and then it's being evaporated because the water would be produced by the
electrolysis.
Yeah, anyway, it's producing water. It's the fuel cells, that's it. The byproduct is water. Now, how much water would be required to remove the heat that is generated? Because we know how much heat will be generated. We know how much water would be required to remove that amount of heat. It's fairly basic science. In fact, Ralph Rene goes into it in some detail in his book, NASA Mooned America. Got quite a lot of the information about that. Now, the actual black body radiation calculation, which is what he used to calculate the internal temperature of the command module, 246 degrees Fahrenheit, i.e. higher than the boiling point of water. But if it was being cooled by using water generated from the fuel cells and then pumped into the command module, how was the heat in the command module removed so it could be subliminated away by the subliminators on the service module?
Now, this is for the command module. See, the radiation, excessive heat was removed through radiation. The service module had 2 space radiation panels located on its surface.
You got the coolant loops, water glycol coolant mixture.
Yeah, but they're claiming that it's being evaporated into the vacuum of space, right? So they're releasing the water.
Yes.
Because sublimation is not sufficient to remove that amount of heat. So the heat builds up in the water and they let it go.
Well, that would work.
Yeah, that would work, but you run out of water.
Yeah, but they have this water reclamation system over here in the service module.
But you still run out of water.
They don't say the amount of water they actually used. They just said 62.5% ethylene glycol and 37.5% water. But they don't say how much they used.
That's a nice little mixture that you put in your car, like rad fluid, right? So it doesn't freeze up.
But air conditioning does not work in space. It has to be radiated away. That's the problem. I've never found the answer to that.
160 gallons of water, and it was trucked in from Orlando, Florida. That's how much water was in that CSM, 160 gallons.
They brought it in from SeaWorld, did they?
Yep.
Is that U.S. gallons?
And one can work out how much that weighs.
16,000 pounds.
Yeah, that's nearly 3/4 of a ton.
It's 10 pounds per gallon, U.S. gallon.
So how much water was in the command module?
Well, they just say 160 gallons. That was total, what they had.
That's 1,600 pounds, 1,600 pounds of water.
Yeah, it's what it says, 160 gallons of water. Yep. That went right along to the surface of the moon to drink and use. There were also 50 gallons aboard the command module just for Collins. That's just Apollo 11, though.
How much do you have to add to stay 3 days? Don't forget, Apollo 11 had 3 batteries and stayed on the surface for 22 hours. So
right.
To stay for 3 days, you had to add 6 more batteries to it.
Yep.
Right? That's another 1,800 pounds just in batteries. You do realize by the time you add a rover to Apollo 15, staying 3 days, the EVAs are 10 times the amount of Apollo 11. So you need 10 times the consumables because they're going out for nearly 24 hours of EVAs.
The total amount of water carried on Apollo 11 CSM was approximately 700 pounds. It was stored in the service module's fuel cells and other storage systems, which was sufficient to meet the crew's needs for the duration of the mission, which lasted about 8 days. 700 pounds of water. That makes no sense.
That's only 70 gallons.
Well, here we go again with this different stuff again. It says, the Apollo Command Service Module carried a significant amount of water for the astronauts' needs. The water was used for drinking, food prep, cooling systems, and producing oxygen through electrolysis. And they're claiming there's only 700 pounds of water for the everything.
How much barbecue starter fluid did they have?
Yeah, back to the comedy show.
I mean, how do they get those briquettes going?
You have 700 pounds, right? And it's 10 per, that's 7,000 pounds.
If you got 700 gallons of fuel?
Yeah.
Or 700 gallons?
Yeah.
Yeah, times 10.
So that means that there would be 16,000. Well, that's a big difference, isn't it? 7,000 pounds and 16,000 pounds. That's double.
Well, that's the same problem you have with the fuel on
Yeah.
the descent stage. You have the same problem. You have 19,100 pounds of fuel, which means you have to have that many gallons. You have to have 1,910 gallons of fuel on board that thing. Of course, the tanks that are available there are only 200 gallons each. The oxidizer and fuel, you only have 800 gallons there, and that's stretching it to put in that thing after you take the insulation, the micrometeor shielding off of there in those tanks. You only got 200 gallons in each tank. So you only have 8,000 pounds of fuel. You're still 11,000 pounds short.
And yet, what's interesting is that, see, these people that are chiming in to answer these questions, not one of them can answer that question. Not one of them.
No,
They can't.
This is interesting. Now, here's the typical menu. So they've got all the menu and everything on there, and they got how much it weighed and right down to the last gram. People ask, how much water did the Apollo 11 carry? And it says, to be precise, 160 gallons of water trucked from Orlando. Neil Armstrong, Buzz, and Michael Collins launched on their moon mission, blah, 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 blah. ChatGPT says 700 pounds. So, which is it?
So the water actually came from Disney then. Who was available in 1969? Was that Shamu the whale?
It's interesting there's so much confusion about it. You'd think it would be a straightforward answer, but it's not. It's actually quite complex.
You look in Quora, and there's not one person in there that can answer that question.
Well, I'll tell you, you might have a moon rock, Marcus.
Yep.
But I have dessert.
Oh my God.
Ice cream sandwich.
Yes, dehydrated. That's for the space shuttle missions, right?
Space shuttle.
And it's supposed to be official NASA stuff. Got everything on the backside for it, all the ingredients.
Yep.
It just says freeze-dried ice cream sandwich. By the way, this one costs $10.
Freeze-dried ice cream sandwich. They expect you to believe it too, don't they?
150 calories.
Space food.
Made by the Lovey-Dovey Corporation.
Okay, get this. When they flew to the moon, the service module had fuel cells, oxygen, and hydrogen tanks. Not only was this combination used to keep the electronic components from overheating, but it also produced water, H2O. According to an engineer at the contractor that built the command and service modules, it produced on the order of 50 to 60 gallons throughout the whole mission. So through electrolysis, this was producing 50 to 60 gallons throughout the whole mission. Now, of course, they don't answer the question, well, what mission was it?
Yeah, good point. Because Apollo 11 was just on 8 days. Apollo 17 was 12 days. So 50% more. You'd think they'd have 50% more consumables. Well, they should do.
Well, they need more for their EVAs as well.
Oh, need a lot more for the EVAs.
10 times. They need 10 times more for the EVA, right? Instead of 2 hours out, they're 24 hours out.
And one of the EVAs was just on 8 hours. Now, how much water would be required in the PLSS to remove the heat from the astronaut? Because he's in bright sunlight most of the time. He's generating about 100 watts of energy himself. You've got to remove all that heat and the water. So how much water would be required to sublimate the heat away?
I saw one document that said that the battery would last 3.5 to 4 hours on the PLSS. The water would last 4 hours, 4 to 4.5 hours, depending on how active the astronaut is. And the oxygen would last 6 hours. And then they go all out and have an 8-hour trip every time.
Why did the Apollo astronauts, the Apollo 11 to be specific, have their stars on the Hollywood Walk of Fame?
Because they were film stars.
That's what I thought.
I mean, that's one of the points I'm going to make. You know, how do we know it's real? You've seen it on television. So it must be real. Like King Kong climbing the Empire State Building.
Yeah.
Like dinosaurs chasing kids around kitchens. And men walking on the moon. They've all got Hollywood stars. It's a very good point, that. They've all got Hollywood stars on the Walk of Fame. Were they just film stars?
Only people that have movie careers have film stars. It doesn't make any sense, does it? Really? They're astronauts. What do astronauts have to do with this? With Hollywood film stars?
And why only Apollo 11? Look at the special treatment they gave to them, giving them Corvettes. I think they were giving away 5 Corvettes. But you had 60 astronauts training. Why didn't they all get one?
Or maybe they had a Learjet. You know, the private jets they all flew around in?
They all had T-38 trainers available to them for all their travel. All except Jack Smith. He wasn't a pilot. He didn't have that. But everybody else had their things to travel back and forth from whatever movie set that they were on.
Yes, that's why they're on the Hollywood Hall of Fame, because they're movie stars.
Because NASA has more movie studios than they do launch pads.
Yeah. What's the name of the big one they use, that NASA use?
Downey.
Downey, that's it.
They had all of those studios there, and they were not training facilities. The training facilities with simulators were at Houston, Flagstaff, and the Johnson Space Center also had that, and they had those full simulators available. That's for training purposes. But when you put a simulator in a movie studio, what's it for? It's faking it. So you come into here and you come down this way, and this is where Disney studios are, and Paramount's in between there. That's in Los Angeles. That's Downey. This is all Paramount and Disney over here. But when you come down to this one, and you come right in here and you see the size of this facility, and then you realize that this is Apollo Way right here. There's the parking lot. And all of these buildings here, running all the way down, all of this facility is all Downey Studios, this whole area here.
Who runs Downey Studios?
Well, NASA owns that.
NASA owns it, okay.
They've owned that since 1962, I believe.
So they knew they were going to have to use film studios.
Yeah, and they're right in the middle of every movie production studio out there. They're all located in this area.
Where is that part of Los Angeles in relation to Laurel Canyon, which is in the north of Los Angeles? Yeah, up there. It's quite close by. So you've got all these things are quite close together.
They're definitely going to use that. And you see, the fact of the matter is that there's an actual airport downtown Los Angeles where they could just be flying in and out of. That is a factor for the fact that these guys were in their T-38s available to them. And that's the same factor at Flagstaff. And it's a very central location in the United States when you're crossing from the east to west coast within the same range as Houston, right? It's a very central location when it comes to there. You're no more than an hour from Flagstaff from any part of that. And especially in a T-38 trainer, you could probably do it in less time than that. And these guys are being interviewed daily. Never mind their training. They're being interviewed daily. Newspapers, radio stations, everything else. That was all part of the production. That's how you get your name on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. You get a star there. And the Apollo 11 astronauts all have stars there. And I think there was actually 6 Corvettes available for them. And I think Neil Armstrong took a station wagon or some damn thing instead of a Corvette for his family, because he's a little different type of character.
He was. Yeah.
And you'll see other ones that the other astronauts were leasing Corvettes for $1. That type of thing. That's the kind of promotion they were being given because, of course, GM wanted to have its name on there, the advertising. Same as the Fisher Space Pen. They wanted to have the advertising. The Omega watches. Those companies became huge icons because they're attached to the space program.
Yeah, it's called product placement.
Oh, absolutely. And they all took a huge gratuitous impact on those companies that are still in existence today, and they're still attached to them today.
Well, Omega is using it, and that new film that's coming out, Fly Me to the Moon, they show all these products. They were being used for product placement so that the companies could benefit from the exposure. They got considerable amount of it. I'm quite looking forward to that film. Hopefully it'll be over in the UK in time for me to see it before the debate.
It's being released in what?
July 12.
5 weeks away.
We should have used Kubrick.
Yeah,
Great.
That's a great line.
Which shows that there's certainly a link with the whole Kubrick filmed it stuff, which I don't believe is true, but
Well,
makes a good
hopefully
story.
they have watched our videos enough. That other Space Force program, man, they use quite a bit of our stuff.
Well,
They were watching it.
I think that they are watching it. They won't admit to watching it
no.
because it will upset their credibility, but they have to watch it. If they're in any way researching Apollo, you've got to look at both sides of it. You've got to look at the hoax side of it as well as the real side of it, because otherwise you don't get a balance. Oh, talking of hoax, you see that flight to the moon with the Japanese billionaire? It's been cancelled. Everybody's very upset. Was it Everyday Astronaut? He was whittering on about it, how upset he was that he couldn't go to the moon.
He was really looking forward to that one.
Well, he was, but now he's realized that maybe it was rather a dangerous thing to do. And I think the Japanese guy has decided it's far too dangerous.
I think after they saw what happened to the 5 individuals on that submarine that imploded, I think that might have given him a few thoughts to think about.
What's that re-entry vehicle that they're working on? Bezos, a Starliner?
Yeah, made by Boeing.
And they're canceling that as well?
Yep.
I watched a bit of a thing on it. Man, they're putting this thing together. They're taking it apart. They're putting it back together again on the stuff. And the entire problem, of course, is the heat shields. Because they can't figure out how to get the wheels in there and the heat shields at the same time. So then you see the front of it. It doesn't even have a landing gear on the front. It's just got a drag thing. It comes out. It's the only way they can design the heat shields out there, and then just drag the nose off of it that way. Like it just pulls out. And I'm going, man, they got such a problem with it. But you see the heat shields and then all the foam insulation in between them on this vehicle. And you don't see that design on Apollo programs. They don't have all of this insulation in behind the heat shield. So there's got to be another problem going on there. If you had the heat shields right up against the aluminum, it's still going to transfer that heat in there.
Yeah, of course it is. Yeah.
And you take a look at the insulation they put on that particular vehicle that they're doing, and there is one video out there, are they canceling this project, right? Kind of thing. Are they going to cancel it? And they're showing it being put together and taken apart and shipped all over the place and then taken apart again and put back together many, many times. But they're showing the different sections, like the different layers of it, because they keep pulling the heat shields off and then the insulation off and back to the hull and putting it back together again to try and figure out the landing gear and all this other stuff. But the other thing that people don't understand is any vehicle on re-entry, like even the space shuttle program, all of the fuel, oxygen tanks, everything were vented before re-entry. So when you see these vehicles coming in, they do not have any thrust control of any kind. They're simply a glider at that particular point in time. And that's the same with the Apollo command module. Everything is vented coming in. So how do you do a skip re-entry?
Who knows?
If you vent the fuel, because you're going to heat it up, and it's too dangerous to have it heated up, you vent all the fuel, all the oxygen, everything else. The only oxygen you have is the residual oxygen in the craft until you land on the parachutes. If you're doing a skip re-entry, the first impact heats it up the most, and then they need to use fuel to guide it back in again, which means now they're not venting the tanks.
But they weren't using skip re-entry either.
Well, for Orion, they claim skip re-entry.
That's the only way they can do it.
If you vent the fuel out, you have no control of the vehicle.
That's true.
You know what they said the Russians did? They had a little fin that was up on the top of the capsule. And what they did was they just rotated the capsule this way and that way so the fin would grab the atmosphere and push it down. And then when they let it this way, it would just push it back up again, just like an elevator on an aircraft. I don't know how Apollo did it without fuel on those retro rockets.
Well, Apollo didn't use the skip re-entry.
No, it didn't.
Some documents claim they did.
You've seen that account of the chap who attended the Autographica fair where the astronauts were speaking in London. I think it's one of the Apollo 16 astronauts was asked about that exact point. How did they get back? Why didn't they use skip re-entry? That was the question. And basically, he was removed from the auditorium for asking. It was Stafford he was asking. That's right. Mm-hmm. And he was removed from the auditorium because he was a conspiracy theorist for asking that question. It's a very sensible question.
doesn't matter if you're re-entering the atmosphere, the vehicle's going to heat up. You're going to need to vent every tank, whether it's an oxygen tank, fuel tank, or whatever, to stop an unexpected, disassembly of equipment. And that's been part of the entire program, what's on the thing. And then they turn around and they claim, oh, well, we got these little retro rockets that are operating. No, those are already vented off. They're not operating.
No, they're not. It's coming in like a stone at a particular angle, quite a narrow angle, 6 degrees.
Yeah, or it's going to skip or rotate or tumble.
Yeah, or burn up.
You imagine coming in at 25,000 miles an hour, how fast that thing's going to start to tumble at. It'll do a couple of rotations because it's going to be spinning at 30 to 40,000 RPM. Yeah, it's going to start spinning on re-entry if it starts to tumble, if the air grabs one side of it and then it starts to go. And I mean, the thing is just going to fly apart. It's just going to disintegrate. Never mind the fact that it's already creating plasma on the outside of the vehicle. That's exactly how dangerous it is for what they're doing with this vehicle. And it's not even shaped correctly for a re-entry. No. And they claim they control that with, gyros and stuff like that.
And that heat shield nearly failed. I mean, we've seen the pictures of the Orion heat shield, but there weren't problems like that on Apollo, or not that we heard about. If the Apollo craft only went into low Earth orbit, it would have had less stresses on it than if it had returned from lunar orbit.
Well, for Apollo, they had special stickers that they put on the craft that made them absolutely bulletproof. And they don't know how to make those stickers. They still make NASA stickers, but they don't know how to make those stickers.
Yeah,
that's the difference.
Well, you know what? This is a very interesting article. If you go on ALICE Online and you look at the article called Separation, Transposition, and Docking STD of Apollo 11 was in low Earth orbit. This article was done by Julius A. Birch, PhD. And what it's showing is the analysis of this 70 millimeter Apollo image. And a few of these numbers, for example, was AS11-36-5301 through AS11-36-5313. And the 16 millimeter film magazine strongly suggests that at the time of the filming of Apollo 11, the craft was only in low Earth orbit. And he goes on to build a case to prove this. Now, it's interesting when you click on the bottom on the PDF and it will take you directly to this article. And he actually goes and shows you all the mathematics that were involved in this. He's really done a lot of work to prove that Apollo 11 was in low Earth orbit and went nowhere but low Earth orbit. And he goes through the docking procedures. He goes through the photography. He goes through the DAC cameras, the Maurer 16 millimeter DAC camera. He goes through all the resolutions, the aperture, everything that you could possibly want to know. And he goes and does this frame by frame by frame, and he divides them all up so that it makes sense. And then he does the mathematics to prove it. He has graphs. He has Apollo 11 low Earth parking orbit. He's worked all that out. Now, why don't people, like, for example, the proponents, go over here and look at these articles and read them before they start making silly comments about it? You know, they don't do any research on our side, but they expect us to conduct research on their side, which, of course, we do anyway because we have to compare these things. But my gosh, I mean, it just goes to show you, he has everything all laid out for you guys. So I suggest that you hop over to ALICE.com and read the separation, transposition, and docking of Apollo 11 in low Earth orbit, the article by Julius A. Birch. I recommend it because it was dated May 2018 to 2021 is what he has here. We were talking about flight dynamics. That's what kind of got me on this path. You see, this is just a point. You know, Table 6 summarizes major inconsistencies in the description of the maneuvers on film and its technical documentation. Well, where have we seen that before?
Yes.
These all strongly suggest that the filming could not have been done with the DAC 18mm camera. Consequently, neither the HEC 80mm could have been used when photographing the maneuvers. Rather, as shown in Table 567, the DAC must have been filming with the 10mm lens. The immediate consequence is that it must have been the HMC 38mm that was used to photograph the S1VB in AS11-36-5310 through AS11-36-5313. That's interesting. The nice thing is he has documents to prove it.
Yeah, he does. Interesting stuff. Very interesting. Very interesting.